I used to love Thanksgiving. The sound of the oven timer. The smell of cinnamon and rosemary blending in the air. The soft hum of my husband's voice from the living room, while he teased the kids about who'd get the last slice of pie. For years, it was our ritual, a day that made me feel safe, grounded, and grateful. But last Thanksgiving, something shifted, and by the end of that night, I realized that gratitude can rot if you give it to the wrong people. My name is Jordan Davidson. I'm 47 years old, and I was married for 23 of them. I thought I understood loyalty, the kind that stays even when passion fades, when routines replace romance, when silence fills the spaces that laughter used to occupy. I thought that kind of loyalty still meant something. But the truth is, love only holds its shape when both people want to carry it. Otherwise, one of them just ends up dragging the weight alone. That evening, I remember every detail with painful clarity. The golden brown turkey resting on the tray, the table dressed in burnt orange linens, the laughter of my children echoing down the hall. My daughter Lily was home from college. My son Evan had brought his new girlfriend. And I had spent 3 days preparing a meal that felt like a love letter to the life we'd built. Taylor, my husband, looked distracted. His smile never reached his eyes. And every time his phone buzzed, he'd flinch slightly before turning it face down beside his plate. I told myself not to notice. That's what women do when they sense the truth before they're ready to face it. They pretend not to notice. We were halfway through dessert when he cleared his throat. "I have some news," he said, setting down his fork. His tone was casual, like he was about to announce a vacation plan. "I've decided to sell the house." The words didn't make sense at first. I blinked at him, the fork frozen halfway to my mouth. "What?" "The market's great right now," he continued, his voice unnervingly calm. "We should cash out before prices dip." Lily frowned. "Dad, what are you talking about? Mom loves this house." He didn't look at her. He looked at me. "It's time to move on. Jordan, we've both known that for a while." The room fell silent. My son's girlfriend coughed awkwardly. My daughter's eyes darted between us, searching for some sign that this was a joke. I forced a smile. "We've both known that. Funny, I must have missed the memo." "Jordan." "No," I said softly, setting my fork down. "Say what you really mean." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've met someone. Her name's Holly. We're serious. I think it's time I start fresh." Time slowed. I remember Lily's fork clattering against her plate, Evan muttering something under his breath. I remember the faint whistle of the heater and the way the candles flickered as if the air itself recoiled from his words. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my heart a quiet storm. He continued talking about amicable transitions, about how he'd make sure I was taken care of financially. Words so detached they felt rehearsed. The man I'd built a life with, who'd once held my hair while I cried after miscarrying our first child, now spoke to me like a business partner ending a contract. When he finally stopped, I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Pass the cranberry sauce." The silence that followed was unbearable and perfect. That night, after the guests left and the house returned to its hollow quiet, I sat on the edge of our bed while he packed an overnight bag. He told me he'd stay at a hotel for a few days to give everyone space. His tone was apologetic, but his eyes held the guilty relief of a man who had already crossed every line. When he walked out, the door clicked shut with the soft finality of something breaking for good. I didn't scream or throw anything. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the empty side of the bed, at the faint imprint where his body had been. The moonlight spilled across the carpet like a confession, and I finally whispered the question that had been sitting at the back of my throat for months. "When did you stop loving me?" There was no answer. Of course, only silence, heavy, cruel, familiar. I barely slept that night. Instead, I wandered through every room of the house, touching the walls, The framed photos, the furniture we'd chosen together. Everything felt like a ghost of us, the us that had existed before time and resentment wore us down. By dawn, I found myself in the kitchen, still in my robe, holding a mug of cold coffee and staring out the window at the garden I'd planted 15 years ago. That's when I decided something. He could leave me, humiliate me, betray me, but he would not erase me. The next few weeks were a blur of false civility. Taylor came by occasionally to discuss logistics, always in that condescending tone men use when they think they're being noble. He wanted to make it easy for everyone, easy as if destruction could ever be clean. I played my part, smiled, nodded, agreed. He thought my calmness meant acceptance. But it wasn't calm. It was calculation. While he was busy playing house with his new girlfriend, a 3-4-year-old yoga instructor who posted daily quotes about manifesting your best life, I began quietly pulling every document, every bank statement, every property record I could find. For 23 years, I had let him handle our finances, trusting him completely. That trust was my biggest mistake, but it was also his. Because he underestimated what happens when a woman like me learns how much power she actually has. I spent nights combing through files, highlighting names, tracing transfers. That's when I found it 2 months before Thanksgiving. He had quietly refinanced our mortgage. The new deed listed both our names, but the payment account was linked to my business account. He had used my credit, my trust, to secure his fresh start. I remember sitting there, staring at the document, my hands shaking. For the first time, the anger I'd been suppressing didn't feel like poison. It felt like clarity. If betrayal was an art, then revenge could be one too. I began documenting everything. Every email, every message, every financial slip-up. I took screenshots, printed statements, and sent copies to a private folder under a false name. When he called to say he and Holly were looking at new houses in the suburbs, I told him how happy I was for him. I offered to handle the real estate paperwork, since I still had contacts. He agreed. Of course. He always loved delegating anything that required patience or detail. That's how I found out they were looking at our old realtor, the same woman who had helped us buy this house 15 years ago. When I met with her, I didn't tell her everything. Just enough. Enough for her to understand that Taylor was about to make a very expensive mistake. A week later, the deed transfer was finalized. He thought he was buying me out of the property. But what he didn't realize, what I had arranged, was that the new deed listed only my name. Legally, the house was mine. He'd given me every tool to destroy him, and all I had to do was let him think he was winning. The day he came to collect the rest of his things, he seemed lighter, almost smug. "I'm glad we're keeping this civil," he said, boxing up his suits and cufflinks. "I knew you'd handle this maturely." I just nodded. "It's for the best. Taylor, we both deserve peace." He smiled, that familiar, infuriating smile that once made me fall in love with him. "You'll see. Jordan, this is a good thing." "Yes," I said quietly, "it is." As he carried the last box to his car, I watched from the window, my hands steady, my expression unreadable. I had spent months mourning the end of our marriage, but as his taillights disappeared down the street, I felt something shift inside me, not relief, not victory, but power, because for the first time in my life, he had no idea what I was capable of. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the quiet glow of my living room. The house felt different, not empty, but reclaimed. I thought about all the years I'd given him, the sacrifices, the compromises, the blind faith. And then I thought about how easily he had traded it all for someone newer. Shania. Simpler. Men like him never look back until everything they took for granted is gone. I smiled then. A small, steady smile. And whispered to the silence, "You'll remember me. Taylor, you'll remember everything." I didn't know exactly how the rest of the plan would unfold, not yet. But I knew this every move from here on out would be deliberate. Because revenge, like healing, isn't loud. It's patient. It waits until the moment is right, and then it blooms. The morning after he left for good, I woke up to an unfamiliar quiet. Not the lonely kind, but the kind that felt almost like freedom stretching its limbs. The sunlight crawled through the blinds, painting soft lines across the wooden floor. And for the first time in years, I didn't rush out of bed to make breakfast. Didn't check if his shirts were ironed or if his calendar was synced. I just lay there, letting the silence settle into my bones, listening to the distant hum of the city that had always existed beyond the boundaries of our life together. It's strange how grief doesn't come all at once. It seeps in quietly, like fog over a field. Some days, I felt invincible sharp, untouchable, fueled by the quiet satisfaction of control. Other days, I'd find myself sitting in the kitchen at midnight, staring at the half-empty bottle of wine he'd left behind, wondering if revenge could ever really fill the space where love used to live. But then I'd remember the image of him standing there, calm and confident, announcing our divorce in front of our children as if I were an item on a checklist. And the answer became clear again. No, this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation, about taking back the parts of myself I had buried to make him comfortable. That thought became my North Star. I spent the next few weeks rebuilding quietly. I reopened my event planning business, something I had put on hold years ago when Taylor said it was too stressful. I started calling old clients, reconnecting with vendors, booking small weddings and charity galas. I told everyone it was just temporary, a way to stay busy. But deep down, I knew I was coming alive again. And then, one morning, my realtor called. Jordan, she said, her tone tight. Did you know Taylor's been trying to sell your property again, privately? This time, I laughed softly. Of course he has. He didn't know yet that he couldn't. He didn't realize that every document he'd signed in his arrogance had made me the sole legal owner. I thanked her for the heads up and told her to let him try that some lessons only work when they cost you something. That weekend, he showed up at the house unannounced. I saw his car pull into the driveway and didn't move to answer the door. I just waited, sipping coffee as he knocked, then rang the bell twice. Impatiently. Finally, I opened it. Jordan, we need to talk, he said, stepping past me before I could stop him. His tone carried that same quiet entitlement I'd lived with for decades. I leaned against the doorframe. About what? He looked around the house, the same house he'd once called our greatest investment. The buyers are ready to move forward. But the bank says there's an issue with the title. Something about it being under your name only. Yes, I said evenly. Because it is. His brow furrowed. That's impossible. I refinanced everything myself. You used my account. Taylor. I interrupted. My credit. My assets. You didn't notice that I reviewed every paper before signing them. His face paled. You tricked me. I smiled faintly. No, I simply stopped letting you trick me. For a moment, he just stood there, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Then he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You've always been vindictive. I've always been quiet. I said. You mistook that for weakness. He turned away, muttering something under his breath, and left without another word. I watched him drive off, the car speeding down the street like a retreating ego. And for the first time, I didn't feel pain watching him go. I felt peace. A few days later, I got a call from my daughter. Mom, Lily said softly, Dad told me you're being difficult, that you're trying to take everything from him. I closed my eyes, breathing in deeply before answering. Honey, do you really think that after everything he's done, I owe him more? She hesitated. I don't know what to think. He sounds different, desperate. He should be, I said quietly. He's losing something he thought he owned. I heard her sigh. I just don't want this to turn into a war. It won't. I promised. Wars happen when both sides fight. I'm not fighting. Lily. I'm simply done surrendering. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, softly, I'm proud of you. Mom. That was all I needed to hear. The following months were almost cinematic in their unfolding. Taylor and Holly's relationship started cracking under the same weight that had broken our marriage: his need to control. His hunger for admiration. His inability to be content with stability. She wanted more money. More status. More of everything he no longer had. I didn't need to interfere. Karma was doing its quiet, methodical work. One evening, I received an email meant for him. It was from his employer, a polite but cold notice of termination. Conflict of interest discovered. It read, effective immediately. Apparently, his little financial manipulations had come to light. I didn't even have to lift a finger. When I saw the message, I didn't feel joy, just closure. Because sometimes justice doesn't need an audience. It just needs patience. But there was one last piece I needed to settle. The house. I had thought about selling it, about wiping every memory of him from its walls. But every time I stood in the living room, sunlight spilling through the curtains, I realized this house wasn't a monument to pain anymore. It was proof of endurance. So instead, I decided to transform it. The following month, I opened it to others, turning it into a retreat for women rebuilding after divorce. Loss. Or betrayal. I called it Haven House. The name came to me one night while sitting in the backyard, watching the wind move through the trees. Haven, a place where storms lose their power. Every room was redesigned with intention. The master bedroom became a counseling space. The guest rooms turned into creative studios. The kitchen stayed exactly the same. Because I wanted it to smell like home, not his memory. But mine. The first night it opened, a group of women sat around the long dining table where my life had once shattered. We shared wine and stories, laughter and tears. And by the end of the evening, the room that had once echoed with betrayal was filled with something new, healing. As I watched them, I realized that this not revenge, not victory, was the real ending I had been waiting for. Months later, I ran into Taylor at the grocery store. He looked thinner, tired, older in a way that had nothing to do with time. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. He approached hesitantly, eyes downcast. Jordan. I nodded politely. Taylor. He glanced at my basket: fresh flowers, good wine, imported cheese. The small signs of someone who had learned to enjoy life again. You look happy, he said, almost surprised. I am. He shifted uncomfortably. I heard about Haven House. It's nice. What you're doing. Thank you. He hesitated, then whispered, You deserved better than me. I looked at him for a long moment. The man who had once been my world, now just another passerby in a grocery aisle. I know, I said softly. That's why I gave it to myself. He nodded, eyes glistening, and walked away. I watched him go, not with hatred or pity, but with the calm understanding that comes when you've finally outgrown the version of yourself who needed someone's validation. Because in the end, closure isn't found in apologies. It's found in the quiet truth that you no longer need them. That night, as I closed up Haven House, I stood by the window, looking at the glow of the streetlights and the faint shimmer of rain on the pavement. I thought about everything: the betrayal, the unraveling, the rebirth. And I realized that life had not taken something from me. It had returned me to myself. For years, I had built my identity around being someone's wife, someone's support, someone's background. But now, I was the main character of my own story. And maybe that's the real revenge, not destruction. Not payback, but peace. Because peace, once earned, is louder than any scream. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt true stories about love, betrayal, and rediscovery. And tell me in the comments, have you ever found strength in letting go?